Well, welcome everyone. This is the August meeting of the Cleveland C# VB.NET User Group. For those of you that are new and joining us for the first time, welcome. We meet every month, every fourth Thursday in the evening, and meetings are free of charge and open to the public. We cover a variety of topics related to .NET, and all the meeting information can be found on the meetup.com and where the URL is listed here. In addition, in the comments section of today's meeting, there will be links to events that will be happening in the area, which I will announce afterwards. I'd like to give a big thank you to our sponsors. Despite the quarantine, we've utilized a lot of their services before quarantine, and still like to give them a big thank you during the quarantine period. Tech Systems, Inedo, PostSharp, and NIS Technologies. Some general information. Basically, this slide was used back in the good old days when we met in person, but now the only valuable piece of that is the third one, where participation is encouraged. So feel free to jump in with questions verbally during the presentation, or feel free to type them into the chat. And Matt will take questions as they come. Speaking of Matt, he is our tonight's feature presentation, and he will be presenting Dialogue with Your Data, Interactive AI with Cognitive Services. Matt is a consultant from the Lexington, Kentucky area. He's a database developer turned full-time DBA. He's also an international speaker, Microsoft MVP since 2000, an IDERA ACE alumnus, and a 2020 Friend of Redgate. So needless to say, Matt is very knowledgeable in a lot of things related to data as well as artificial intelligence. And so with that, I will turn control over to Matt, and he'll take it from here.
Okay. And actually, I'm a 3-time MVP. I've been working with SQL Server since 2000, but I'm not a 20-time MVP. That'd be really cool, though. I'd have a very nice award stack. But
that would be cool, but you should have just went with it, Matt.
Somebody's out there looking me up like, that's not true.
All right, the floor is all yours.
All right, so let's see. Let me get the control. There we go. All right, we'll get the controls out of the way here. Okay, all right. Well, I can mostly skip this slide because this is indeed the title of that talk. So let's get to some stuff about me before we dive into this. So here are some of the ways to find me. I'm an architect with Insight DI. So if there's anything you see me talk about, and you're like, oh, this is really cool, but we don't have anybody that knows how to do this or has the time to do this, and you'd like to hire consultants to do it, I like my job. So that's the way to find me if you want to do that. But also, if you have any questions, feedback, comments, whatever, feel free to send me a note there. I'm everywhere online, SQL at Speed. My blog is sqlatspeed.com. One of my personal goals for the year was to do a blog post a month, but 2020 has certainly not gone as planned for anybody, including me. So there is some good cognitive services content on there, and I'll refer to it a couple times in this. None of it's particularly recent. So there's a mix of good stuff, and as we get into the final third of the year there, you will see new posts. But yeah, there's some good stuff on there, and especially if you're interested in the things I talk about tonight, there's a couple really good posts on there. A little bit more about me, but really what I want to do is draw your attention to that final line. So I know this is a developer group, so it's not PaaS, it's not a data group, but I think it's awesome that there's people here. I know it's really weird to try to stay involved in community things, especially right now when just about everything's virtual, and most of us are sitting in front of screens all day, and you may not look forward to doing that at night. But the fact that you're here is great, and trying to learn something that maybe you don't know, that's awesome. Keep doing it. And I know groups like this, whether it's in dev or data or whatever, always need help. They always need volunteers, always need speakers, sponsors, all those sorts of things. So it's really helped me out during this time to kind of stay involved with this stuff, even though there's no events. It's cool to hang out in these groups, speak to them sometimes, and I definitely encourage you to keep doing just that. Like I said, everywhere online, I am SQL at Speed, and this is a reminder that that's basically the best way to find me. but it's also a good excuse to show this slide. So I've only gotten to do this once this year, but if you're not very into data or AI or anything like that, but you love car racing, it's the only thing I like to talk about more than this stuff. So happy to chat about that. And I actually am going to be fortunate enough to run that number 5 car at Mid-Ohio, not this weekend, but next. No spectators, very limited crew and all that, but really looking forward to getting back out there in such a strange year. Anyhow, you're not here to learn about me. You're here to learn about this stuff. So here's how we're going to walk through what we do tonight. For those of you who don't know, this is kind of a weird topic because it blends data and dev and all those sorts of things. So I'll talk about what Azure Cognitive Services are, if you don't know. And then we're going to spend most of the night in the language API part of that. And so I'll touch on basically the stuff it can do that I think is cool, or that I think can be really helpful. So whether you're coming from an app dev background or a data background or whatever, I think there's helpful stuff in here. And these days, especially, anything we can do to expand our skill sets, I think is helpful. It's always nice to talk to a potential customer or employer or something like that, say, not only can I do this, but I can do these other things too. So that's kind of the goal of this talk, is no matter what technical background you're from or not technical at all, there's some cool stuff in here, things that you can do, you could take home, even though we're all home, so you could do right after this session. So that's a list of the demos. Mostly, if I have time, we'll get to the automated content moderation stuff here. I likely have a hard stop at about 10 till 8 to do some stuff for the kids. And then we'll wrap up after all that and talk about just some things either that I've done with it as consulting gigs or things as people have attended, because I've been speaking on this subject, I guess about 2.5 years. So there's a list in there of what I know other people have done with this stuff. So hopefully you find some of that helpful. And feel free to throw a question in the chat basically at any point. And there's not like structured breaks in here, but I do have a glass of water next to me and occasionally I'll want to grab that. So yeah, just throw something in the chat and we'll get to it then. So what is this stuff? Actually, if you're looking at the bottom of the screen, I'm using it right now. So the subtitles feature in PowerPoint uses basically a call out to Azure Cognitive Services to transcribe what I'm saying. It's interesting. I've been working with this stuff about 3 years, and it's been really interesting to see it mature to the point where, we're not just playing with it and it's actually being built into Microsoft's products and things like that. So if you learn nothing else from this talk, know that when you turn subtitles on in PowerPoint, it actually uses this stuff too. It uses more of the speech API, which we'll talk about. But yeah, by the end of this talk, you'll know kind of how to talk to all these, and you'll know a little bit about how this works. So what is it? It's a set of APIs. So it's a little weird, and you'll notice this whether it's blogs or other things. Oh, sorry about that. You'll hear it referred to as an API or a group of APIs. So really what it is, there's APIs underneath kind of the cognitive services umbrella, and then I would argue there's APIs underneath there. So the term does get thrown around for all of this, but really it's stuff you can talk to programmatically if you want, or not, and we'll get to that here in a second. So Microsoft's description of it is it's a set of ML algorithms to solve problems in the field of AI. It's really vague, right? It's intentional. Like I said, I've been working on this stuff about 3 years. The pace of development in this is kind of mind-blowing. Like I had to change a slide in here 2 days ago because something changed. So it's fun to work on, also makes it a challenge as well. And it's part of the reason the marketing around this is really vague, because they keep building in stuff that maybe 2 or 3 years ago, they didn't even think about. And in fact, if you remember the ad from the holiday season last year, where the girl, I think, took her Surface out into the yard to talk to reindeer, it was a Microsoft AI ad. And obviously the speech API does not support reindeer as far as I know. But what they were referring to is it was this stuff. So you'll see it, for us, we'll call it this name, but if you see references to Microsoft AI, especially with language, speech, vision, things like that, this is actually what they're talking about. So what it really is it's code that you can talk to. So it's a lot of mostly pre-trained, though I'll go over a couple examples where that's not true, ML models that you can call either with code you write or bots or no code options. So I've got a note there, Logic Apps, Q&A Maker, things like that. You don't have to write a line of code to use this stuff. But if you want to dive into it, the last demo I'll do, or the second to last one, is a basic C# app calling this stuff. So we'll talk about all the different ways to do it. And that's why I think this is so much fun to talk about, because no matter what your background or experience level is, you're going to see something tonight that you can do. If you're not a C# dev, you're not a Python dev, fine. We're going to see some stuff where you don't need to write any code at all. And we'll talk about some ways where you can write a little bit of code, but not a lot, and then ways you can write a ton of code. But these can be consumed via standard REST calls. So if the language that you're comfortable in, if you're able to make those calls, this will work. I assume by the name, we have a lot of C# and general .NET folks, and the demo you're going to see is right along those lines. So how do you learn to call them? So let's say you're like, wow, this guy's super boring and I'm going to leave the talk, but I really do want to know more about this stuff. One of the really nice improvements that Microsoft's made, I would say across products, but especially with this stuff in the last few years, the documentation's really good. It didn't used to be. Right now, it's really, really strong, and that's why I've got a link to it here and a couple more specific links in my resources slide as well. Not only is it, a pretty dry, like here's what all the arguments are and here's some options. There are examples in I think 3 common languages on just about every page. I know there's Python and C# and I think 1 or 2 more. And they also build a lot of quick starts as well. So it's not just you have to maybe know the name of the method and go look that up, and then maybe you'll stumble across an example on the bottom. They've built a lot of good examples that kind of walk you through a lot of this stuff. And in fact, the demo I'll show you at the end started out as me playing with one of their quick starts, and then I made some changes to it for this. So lots and lots of good stuff here. If you have to leave or just don't like me, you can hit that link there and learn all kinds of cool stuff. So, and there, okay, well, that was cool. I hit my right arrow key and the slide went backwards. So we're gonna, okay, there we go. Yeah, so what's the list? So like I said, we're gonna spend the evening in language. And just this is just like a brief description of what these do. It's not fair to any of these 5 to limit it to the handful of words that I've got here, but the slide only has so much room. So language is understanding sentences, intent, context, conversation, things like that. Vision kind of does what it sounds like, analyzes videos, images, things like that. I'm not going to speak about that tonight. There are good sessions floating around about that. Actually, a friend of mine for Data Platform Summit, which is based in India but global this year, is doing a really fascinating session on that. So if you're not familiar with DPS, I think their Twitter handle is Data AI Summit. Definitely check that out. There's going to be some really good AI sessions there from some friends of mine. So you've got vision, you've got speech. Speech is really cool, and it does way more than what you see there. So it will do speech to text, text to speech, and kind of things we've grown to think are standards. Speaker ID. It will also do translation and things like that. So the language translation that I'm going to show you at the end of this, and that's where we walk through the structures in code and kind of how it all works. If you think that's really cool, but it's dry because it's just a console app and that's not that exciting, it's very similar to the way speech works. And you can do some really fascinating stuff with that demos really, really well. Better in person, because it can be hard to do audio demos in this, but if language, you're like, that was kind of boring, but I want to go play with that speech thing, what I'm going to show you is mostly transferable there. We also have they call it decision. Really what it is, it's almost like Super Bing, but for academic research and things that a traditional, let's say, Google search may not find. They have some things tailored specifically to find academic papers, research, things like that. And then you've got web search, which I actually think they've started calling cognitive search, which in my opinion is a bit confusing, but it's basically a smarter search. But for the night, for the next hour, we're going to talk about language. But one of the things I want you to keep in mind is you're not stuck with that. So everything I'm going to show you tonight is language only. But because you talk to these in very similar ways, and a lot of the things they send back to you when you call them look pretty similar, same structure, and at the end we're going to go over what that structure looks like. You can combine these together to do some really cool stuff. And it all talks under the covers via JSON, basically. So it's fairly readable. And like I said, you're going to see something at the end of kind of what it sends back. And as long as you can make sense of what's happening there, then you're going to be able to play with a lot of these and do some really cool stuff with them. So what is the language API? First, I'm going to take a quick drink. So are there any questions? Yeah, it's with the way the presenter controls are, it's actually, I can't see the chat. So pardon me. I'm going to take that as a no, and we will dive on into it. So what is it?
Actually, if I could interrupt you, Matt. Sorry,
Yeah, sure.
There's a question in the chat. He's asking, is that subtitle service specifically trained to your voice?
No, I just turned it on, and I've seen, so I forget when it was actually introduced. The first time I saw it used, I did kind of the original version of this session that was actually pretty different from this, but it's some of the same stuff at the BI edition of SQL Saturday Austin back in February when we used to be able to fly places. And it was mandatory at that event for accessibility reasons to turn these on. I had never really played with them. I'd heard that it was coming and I knew I had it. I hadn't really messed with it, but no training at all. And across that event, there were speakers, like I have a fairly generic US accent, but there were speakers there from Italy and India and all that with accents that sounded a lot cooler than mine. And it did pretty well with all of it. Now it's not perfect, but yeah, there's no training. I think mine's pretty easy to pick up because I lived half my life in the north, half in the south. I don't know that I have much of an accent at all, but even people with strong accents, it handles it really well. And you just turn it on. Was there anything else?
No, that's it so far, but I will let you know as questions come up.
Okay, cool. Sounds good. Yeah, feel free to just shout at me. Okay, so Microsoft says that the language API, and you can see it there, increases your application's ability to read, comprehend, and enrich written text. So that sounds pretty marketing-y. It sounds pretty vague. But it actually does a good job of describing what it does, because the things we're going to walk through, and this is important, especially if you're dealing with websites or any app that somebody's interacting with, a lot of times that's going to be written, especially on a site, maybe if somebody comes to shop or order food or whatever it might be. And all this stuff does help that, and it does help that customer or user experience to be better. What do I say it does? Really what it does is what I just said. It helps us and apps we write. We can talk more easily with users, customers, or people that might turn in to that. And it can also just make some things easier for you as well. So I refer to it as the language API, and the question I always got, so I put it as a point on this slide is, is this just one thing? Like, is it just this thing I call and no. So there's a lot of APIs like we talked about earlier kind of underneath this, but it's easy to refer to as that. So what can we do with it? So this is what I'm going to show you tonight is really just a subset. It's kind of introducing you to at least currently what kind of each component of it is. So if you go to the main like marketing site for the Cognitive Services language API, you're going to see headings for these 5 things. The stuff I show you is not at all the only things that these 5 things can do, but I intend this talk to be kind of a crash course in all this stuff, and hopefully you come away with it where one or more of these 5 things you're like, oh, that's really, really cool. I want to go play with that, and I want to learn more about that and see how I can build it into stuff. Of note, so Immersive Reader, I don't have a demo for it, but I will talk about what it can do. Just came out of preview 2 days ago. And so kind of a note on all this stuff. So like I said, I think in October of 2017, I started working on this stuff because of a soccer podcast, oddly enough. A lot of this stuff was in preview then. I mean, a lot of the stuff I'm talking about in this talk didn't even exist, but like sentiment analysis was in preview at that point in time. And that's what I was using. But we threw really a production-like workload at it. So we were analyzing tweets by soccer fans, so the English top flight. So there's 20 clubs and, you know, worldwide famous clubs. So during a match, there's millions of tweets. And we were throwing, 20 to 30 million tweets through that thing across a match day in a preview service, and it handled it really well. So if you encounter something, whether it's in language or vision or whatever, and you see preview and you're like, that's like beta, that's sketchy, I don't want to mess with it. My experience with the preview services here has actually been really, really good. So don't let that scare you off. And I feel like, especially in Azure, Microsoft's really reluctant to pull that label off. And so don't let that scare you off. Like I said, the only negative experience I've had playing with this stuff is because I did dumb things. Even the preview services are very, very stable. So Immersive Reader, let's kick into that first. So I love the way they describe it on the site, because as marketing-y as the rest of the stuff is, and you'll note I don't have the marketing descriptions on any slide after this because in general they're kind of vague and lame. This one's really good. So you see it there in that first point. And it really does help kind of 3 groups of folks learn a language or improve their language skills. So just a sample of the things that it can do. You can change the viewable size of the text. So obviously somebody with challenges with vision or something like that, that's going to be handy. It can display tooltip pictures of common words, so not every single word, but common nouns and even some verbs and things like that. If you hover over it, so you can imagine like somebody learning a language or a kid trying to improve their skills, they may not know what the word is, but if they hover over that or touch that word, then you'll get a picture, and that helps a lot of folks be like, okay, that word picture, now I've got what that is. Getting more into grammar and things like that. So if you're learning a language, it can also highlight nouns, verbs, other objects, so you can start to understand sentence structure and things like that. And it not just English as well. It'll do this for a few. And in fact, that kind of goes for all this. It's helpful to hit the site for the service that you're working with to see what the supported languages are that week. And I'm not even joking when I say that week. Some of it changes that fast. So even something I say here where it's like, well, I've only played with this in English and German, let's say, it could be next week it supports 3 or 4 more. That's just that's how fast they're changing this stuff. This can also, as you might expect, read the content out loud. So if you learn better on audio, or the audio helps you follow along as you read, it can do that for you. It can display the syllables of words and do pronunciations, so it can speak them out loud. So that's another thing. Even though this is a language API service, it's interacting with the speech API there to make that happen. And they've got some good examples on the site. If this is something that's kind of interesting for you, there's some good examples and walkthroughs of how to implement this. And it also uses the Translator API, which we'll see later. If you're trying to translate content back and forth, like say somebody's English is their second or third or fourth language, it can go back and forth between those two to kind of help them learn that way. So pretty cool stuff. It's the only thing I'm going to talk about tonight that I don't demo, but if you're interested in this, especially for education and accessibility and things like that, the demos on Microsoft's site are excellent. I can't come up with anything better, so I would direct you over there. So let's get into the stuff that there are demos for. But before I get into the slide, I think I saw a question pop up, but I didn't get a chance to read it. Or maybe not. Was there one?
I'm not sure if you can see it, but the question is, does Azure's API have resources that allow for analysis of tweets, similar to your example of the soccer match?
Yes, yeah. So actually, I'm going to show how to wire that up. I think it's in like 4 or 5 slides. So yes, and it's actually, it's really easy to use. So that's where I show a logic app and show a no-code way to talk to this stuff. So yeah, hang out for like 5 or 10 more minutes and we'll get to exactly how that works. And then I'll show what the output of that is too. So yeah, that's, like I said, working on this stuff has given me a lot of unique opportunities. Like I'm working on a book with some friends of mine and all that, but it all started with a dumb thing I did for a soccer podcast. So I always enjoy kind of showing how that worked. And plus it's a great way to get started with understanding this stuff too. So before we get there, we're going to talk about a couple other things. So Luis really deserves a session of its own. And if I recall, Sam, I think you have one. So I'm going to do a very light touch here, and I'm not going to do justice to everything that it does. To make a very long story short, this does a lot of cool stuff. The quick things that we're going to talk about here is how it defines entities and intents, and basically a lot of times when you go to a site and you see that friendly picture that says, 24/7, we're here to help, chat with us. It might be Luis under the bot that you're actually speaking to. So it provides a lot of pre-built models for things, and I'm going to show one of those here in a second. It allows you to create custom models as well. Like I said, this is not a deep dive at all. It's just to kind of show it to you. There's a lot of in-depth content that you can dive into here. So you're able to incorporate this in your apps using APIs, or you can actually build things through the portal as well. So I've linked the portal in this slide. Let's go have a look at it. Okay, so when you first go to the portal, and I don't want to sign out of this because it'll take me a minute to get back into this stuff, but when you first go into the portal, you scroll down through some of the marketing-y stuff, and there's actually kind of a brief demo there that shows a phrase that hits a Luis model and how the entities and intents are parsed out. And so I'm gonna probably at the end of this, I'll sign out and show you how that works. But I'm gonna show you kind of a couple things, just very basic things that I built. And hopefully you kind of understand just the tip of the iceberg of what's in here. So the first thing is, like I said, there's pre-trained models that you can use. You don't have to build anything. And so one of the ones that I did when it comes up is, so I'm building an app that actually later in the book, one of my co-authors then puts a bot on this stuff. There's a restaurant reservation pre-built model. And what you're gonna see here is, let's say we wanna make a reservation at a restaurant. So we want a table for 2 outside at 7:30 or something like that. So what you see here is this. So it's pre-built a lot of things, and you can train and retrain the model to incorporate other phrases and things like that. So we see what we've got here, kind of these scores, and it's how confident is it that it's landed in the right intent here. So the intent is basically, what do you want to do with it? Entities are, it's not so much what you want to do with it, it's what thing do you want to do the intent with. And so you'll see some things here where, like, meal types, and there's actually 4 types, and like I said, I'm not going to dive into all those, but Machine learned and list, when I've played with this stuff, I think are the two most common types. So just kind of a brief glance at what those are. So we see meal type. So that's an entity we need to understand. So what's in that list? So it's the meals you're probably making a reservation for. And you could add synonyms and things like that here. You'll note that's just a list. Somebody's built that. You can import that as well. Machine learned is something different. And so this is, and this, like I said, this part honestly probably deserves its own session as well. But let's go to examples of what that might be and how it's pulled that up. So you can see where it's kind of highlighting that. So it's sushi. So it understands from context there, like, well, that's a cuisine type. It thinks. You know, that score can go all the way up to 1. It's pretty close to 1. You'll see Italian, tacos, things like that. So that's a machine learned thing. So as you train the model, it's pulling more and more things into there. And then just for reference, I'll kind of show you some of the other pre-built domains. I think these are like the 11 most popular, but I think you can search for more. There's home automation, calendars, restaurant reservation, weather, things like that. So that's what a pre-built domain looks like. So let's have a look at a custom one. And this one drives my kids nuts. So when I built it, in theory, our bot is going to talk to a donut shop to order a donut, but it doesn't order a donut, and they're very upset that it doesn't. But so so I input all of this. So we go down to order donut, that's an intent. And then there's some phrases in here. And when I train the model, so as you add these, you know, as you add things here, you can retrain it. And so I told it, let me have a donut. Can I get a donut? So on and so forth. Not that exciting. There's also some things like a greeting or something like that. Entities. So there's nothing here. And so this is kind of half built. And like I said, this was actually built for the book. So there's a reason that it's half built. But my point is, if I come over here to test and say, can I have a donut? It's like, I know what that is. That's the ordered donut intent. And then I'm going to execute whatever's wired into that. So this is very much kind of a headless thing right now. So you're like, well, there's no entities. How does it know that that's donut? So we'll try something else. Can I have a pizza? It's thinking like order, it's so it may think pizza is donut because there's not an entity defined to do that. It knows better. And so that is a very basic look at what this can do. Like I said, the documentation on this is excellent, really in depth. There are really good sessions about this. So I show this before I show Q&A Maker. So this, in my opinion, is a much more advanced, flexible, and robust version of what Q&A Maker is. So this can be a very conversational experience. Like I said, it underpins most of the bots that you see. But let's go back to the slide for Q&A Maker, and then I'll show you a demo of that. Okay, so what can I do with it? So you might guess by the name, Q&A Maker is question and answer maker. It serves you information interactively. So you're able to talk with it, and I'll show you in the demo, there's basically a test bot that you can go to in Azure. It's not the same experience. So Luis is very adept, I would say, and because these are trained models, it can be a nice conversational experience. Q&A Maker, relative to that, is pretty dumb. It's a list of question and answers. There's more to it than that, but at its root, it's that, and it drives off what they call knowledge bases. So those can be FAQ pages, they can be files you upload with lists of questions and their answers. You can actually type them into the web form as well, and I'll kind of show you how to do all of that. And I put these two together at the start and actually kind of present them in reverse order because I want you to understand they are complementary. They do kind of look like they might do the same thing, but the flexibility in this comes from the information that you provide to it, not the implementation. The implementation's pretty fixed. And actually in the demo that I'm going to flip to here in a second, you'll kind of see what I mean. So we saw where Luis is pretty smart, even if we haven't really given our model a lot of information to drive off of. Q&A makers is not as smart. All right, so we go over here, and kind of what sets this up is, so let's go here. So let's say my wife, because I have a birthday coming up in a couple weeks. Let's say my wife wants to buy me a spectacular gift. She knows I like racing. She knows I like to drive cars fast. So she's gone to the web to search for like an exotic car track day thing, where you can spend however much and you get to drive a Ferrari or whatever around a track. And she wants to buy me a fabulous gift. Totally gonna happen. So she's gone to a site, and she's talked to a site, and she's typed in things like this. So this is the bot in Azure. And this is, you can put a nice wrapper on it. And actually, if you go to channels, I'll go to that in a minute, just with a simple iframe, you can drop this onto a website, and you'll get this same experience. It's simple, but it works. So I've asked it, or she's asked it, can I bring guests? She's like, well, maybe Matt will want to bring some of his friends. And it answers back, yes, guests are free to join. But this is where it's not flexible. So you've asked something in a very similar way. Can I bring other people? So it basically sees other, it finds an answer with other, and it kind of thinks, so we've asked the same thing in our mind. So this is where the conversational experience kind of falls down. Sure, you're talking to a bot, but it's not very smart. And so that's kind of an example of what you can do here, but you may wonder, where are the answers coming from? And that's what I'm going to show you. So if you go to qandamaker.ai, you can build one of these. You can go to create a knowledge base, and I'll do that here in a second. So you'll see down here, this is the knowledge base that's underneath this bot. And you'll see I've got questions here and an answer. Now for the guest one, there is a way for me to fix this, but then my demo would be lame. So I could say, well, gee, I have logging from my bot that most people don't say, can I bring guests? They say, can I bring other people, or can I bring my friends? So I could add alternative phrasing here and get the same answer. And if you want to drive more of a conversational experience, you can also add follow-up prompts here and start to build that conversation. But you're building it in a very kind of rote manner, where Luis is much quicker on its feet because of how it works underneath. So you may wonder, like, well, where did you get this? So here's my source. And I don't know anything about this place, so do not take this as an endorsement of their services. It was just when I was building this part of this session back in January, this was the first site that I found. But their FAQ page is here, and so you'll see that, like, that's what's pulled in. So let's talk about how we create a knowledge base and kind of bring this all together. So I'm going to go over here, create one. So the first thing you have to do, and there's good docs on this, but honestly, if you go straight to this address, you almost don't need documentation, because they really do a nice job of walking you through what that is. So you create a Q&A service in Azure. There's different service tiers there. It's not very expensive at all, very cheap. Step 2, you wire that service up to your knowledge base. So this is where down here, you would give it your Azure directory ID, your Azure subscription name, your service, your language as well. So you'll note, so chit chat can happen, and now this is up to 9. I think when I was doing this back in February, it was 6. So you'll get talk back and forth in 9, but it can extract information from a lot more. And then that's where you might bring the translation API to kind of prepare your knowledge base. You could translate it then into one of the languages where it'll talk back and forth. So we scroll through that, we're gonna give it a name, we're gonna populate it, and this is where I, took that and I pasted it here. And it's that simple. Now we can also upload, like it says, tab separated values, PDF, doc, Excel, containing question and answers in sequence. So we can do all of that. And you can do multi-turn extraction as well. So where it drives, you don't have to provide those conversational prompts, maybe the document does it for you. So this is how you build one, and then you get down to the chit chat part where it will talk about stuff it doesn't like it says, it kind of makes small talk. So if you want some basic greetings and things like that, you don't necessarily have to build them. Q&A Maker will do them for you, and you can give it a bit of a personality as well. And then you come down here and click this, and what you end up with is something over at Azure that you can talk to like this. So I can say, how fast can I go? Right, so this is another interesting thing. So is there a limit on speed? Something you'd build in Luis might be intelligent enough to be like, okay, that's close enough to what this is, and I'm going to answer that way. But if I ask, is there a speed limit, which is pretty close to what that says, no speed limit. So it picks up on that. But again, it's definitely not as smart as the other thing I just showed, but it's way easier to build. When I originally built this, I think I built it in 5 minutes. So really fun to play with, and we'll talk later about some of my favorite uses for this at work. Even if you're an app dev or a DBA or something like that, there's some things you can do at work where this is going to make your life a lot easier. So we'll flip back to the slides. Any questions while I'm doing that? Okay, all right. So we've covered Luis, we've covered Q&A Maker, just the basics, but we kind of know what those do, what the differences are. Text analytics. So that's an API underneath the language API. Does more than one thing. And so this is kind of a light touch on some of the things that it does. And then we'll, after this, we'll go to a sentiment analysis demo, which I know there was a question about that. And like I said, that's what pulled me into this world 3 years ago. So it's always fun to kind of go over what that was. So what is key phrase extraction? So key phrase extraction can be a good use, and it can be really good actually to pair it with sentiment analysis sometimes as well, where you can take a large body of unstructured text, like a message board, a bunch of tweets, Facebook posts, LinkedIn posts, whatever. And I want to pull the key phrases out, do kind of a word cloud thing. So I have a Power BI twist on this session that I've done a couple times, where we show a word cloud, and it uses key phrase extraction more or less to do that. So what it will do is it shows, or it pulls out like, well, here's most of the phrases that I see. And you'll note, like if you ever go to Yelp, I know restaurants, we're not obviously probably going out to a lot of restaurants right now, but we're looking at places for delivery and takeout and all that. So if you go to Yelp and you see like the featured phrases where it says like great tacos, good drinks, whatever, powered by a similar technology to this, but you compare it with sentiment analysis to know, are those key phrases good or bad? Like, let's say you work somewhere and you've released a new version of a product or something like that, and all the key phrase, or 80% of the key phrase extractions have curse words in them, and people are really upset and they're angry and all that. That's something you'd want to take action on. So it's not limited to just like word clouds and things like that. You can use some of the other services here to make improvements in your business as well. This does language detection as well, just like the Translator API does. So you're able to detect what an incoming language is, and I pass it off to the Translator API or something like that, depending on what action you want to take. It also does something called named entity recognition as well. So that's something, and you'll see it like on a phone or a website or something like that, where it'll highlight and maybe have like tooltips for, it knows this is a person, or it knows Paris is a place, or it knows $1 is money, or something like that. That named entity recognition gives you the ability to call that out, and then you can maybe drive an action from that. So you can see some of the use cases for it. It also does something called entity linking. And honestly, the documentation page on this is a little confusing. So entity linking is considered to be part of named entity recognition. And I kind of agree and disagree with where they put it, but I want you to know what that is. So what Microsoft says entity linking does is it identifies and disambiguates the identity of an entity found in text. So an example would be Venus is a planet and Venus is a goddess. So it uses kind of context clues around that. And we saw with some of the Luis stuff where the ML models underneath this, context clues are kind of what they're driving off of. It uses that to understand, oh, okay, they're talking about the planet or they're talking about the goddess, and then if you want to, you can link to information on that. What's interesting is the entity linking stuff, the way Microsoft describes it, has a knowledge base underneath it. So it's the same terminology. It's a very different knowledge base to what is under Q&A Maker, because it's not like nobody uploaded a file with a bunch of examples. It actually ingests Wikipedia content to train its model on this stuff. So I thought that was pretty interesting, that it's not, they didn't take like the last version of Encarta or something and put it underneath that. They're using what's essentially a public, arguably open source thing to do this. And sentiment analysis is where we're going to end up. So a brief description of what that is, and then you're going to see how it actually works. So when I started working with this stuff, sentiment analysis was in version 2, and that's kind of the simpler implementation of it to understand. So I'll go over that first, and I'll talk about the current version, which is 3, some of the improvements they made, depending on what your use is. So sentiment analysis basically takes a chunk of text, gives it a score between 0 and 1. 0 is negative, though you'll never see 0. You'll see numbers very close to it. 1 is very positive, though you'll never see 1. I think the best one I've ever seen is like 0.9997 something. And then you can drive workflows off that. So I'll talk about a couple examples at the end of what you could do, if you're monitoring the tweets for your small business or your company or for you. And you may know that, oh goodness, I've gone viral for something I said and everybody's upset with me, or my company's marketing people have stepped in it and now we have a mess we have to go clean up, something like that. So at its basic level, that's what sentiment analysis is. Now, what version 3 did is it gives you the ability, you can take a long chunk of text and it will actually return not just a single score, it will return kind of a blended score. And it will say, well, the first third of it was generally positive, the middle was moderate, the end was negative, or something like that. So, for our context, where I'm going to show tweets and things like that, version 3 doesn't necessarily bring a lot to the table there. But if you're analyzing longer, books, long social media posts, articles, things like that, version 3, it does give you some helpful tools there. So let's check out a demo. So what we've got here is I choose to demo this with Logic Apps because I think Logic Apps are super, super cool. And let me close out some of these other tabs so we can easily get to some of this stuff. Okay, so Logic Apps are, in my opinion, pretty awesome. So let's take 30 seconds and talk about what these are. So Logic Apps are, the best way I can think of to describe them is they're basically containerized event-driven workflows. And it's containers in the Tupperware sense, not the Kubernetes or Docker sense. So not technical containers, but in my mind, it's something, and it's stateless, but when the event that triggers it happens, then it spins up, it runs its stuff, and then it shuts back down. So, what I'm going to show is kind of silly here. There are, I think, almost 300 connectors for these now. So Logic Apps, I think, are kind of the sneaky cool part of this. Cognitive Services, they're not specifically tied to that at all. This is just an Azure service. But Logic Apps have so many uses. They can hook to any social media network. You can hook it to Salesforce. You can hook it to ServiceNow. You can write your own connectors as well. But like I said, I think there's almost 300 native ones. So any workflow that drives off an event, like a new ticket or a new email to support, or anything that happens, a new file lands somewhere, Logic Apps can be an option for you to kick off a workflow from there. So I've heard people doing ETL with this at a pretty basic level. I've heard of people, taking data from one site to another and using Logic Apps to do it. There's several connectors specific to healthcare as well. So these are really, really cool. That's a super quick crash course on it, but Logic Apps are a lot of fun to play with. What I've done here is something pretty dumb. So every Logic App has to start with a trigger. And it's basically when this thing happens, do all the other things. And so our trigger here is when a new tweet is posted. And so it uses the Twitter search API to do this. You can schedule these. You use what's called a recurrence to schedule. It used to be an easier way to schedule, but they deprecated that for some reason. But anyway, you can schedule these, or if you enable them, you can just run it whenever, and you can automate all that. But basically how it works here is you give it some search text. So like the tooltip here says, you could search a phrase, you could search a hashtag, you can search a particular handle, or just a word. So I've chosen dog here. You can tell it how often do you want to check. And once you enable the logic app, it'll wake up at this interval and check. Word to the wise, because this happened to me, this lies. So like I said, what I was doing is basically doing what we called a mood table for top flight English soccer. And we were ranking the teams every weekend for the podcast based on the happiness of their fans. Those were all incredibly busy handles. So we were using each club's official handle as the search term. But as you might imagine during a match, there's fans all over the world, all over the, every time zone. And there's, like I said, sometimes 20, 25 million tweets a weekend. Well, what I learned, and the documentation has actually still not been fixed on this. So I still say this in my talks on it. This says how often do you want to check. So when I started this up, I had it in there to check for every 15 minutes. So basically, including halftime, 7 times a match, I was going to take a sample and see what people were feeling and total that up at the end. Well, if the thing you're searching for never stops, the timer here basically never resets. So if there's always a logic app running, it's basically when the last logic app has stopped and there's no more tweets that it's finding, the timer kicks off. But those never stop because there was always a tweet at that handle for that 105 minutes. And so the first weekend I ran the mood table for this podcast, I spent over $700 in Azure. And these are inexpensive. All this stuff is super cheap. And in fact, there's free tiers for most of it. So everything I'm showing here, you could play with for free or for a couple bucks a month. Like I said, I cost myself $700 in a day. Now, long story short, I reached out to Azure support at the time. The experience was great. I was not an MVP then. I had no strings to pull. They were really great explaining to me how that worked. And so I want to pay that forward and explain it to everybody else. And happy ending, although my wife was really upset at first, didn't need sentiment analysis to understand her attitude towards this at all. They ended up refunding my money because they agreed that this was misleading. But they still haven't fixed the documentation. So share that little bit for you. But anyway, so we search for dogs here. You have to connect it to a Twitter account to do this. And then obviously previously I provisioned a Cognitive Services text analytics resource here in the Azure portal. I don't demo that, but it's very easy. If you type text analytics into the search, it's going to walk you through it. And actually, if you go to my blog at sqlatspeed.com and search for the phrase deep dive, you'll see how I built that mood table start to finish, and it's a very detailed post. It'll walk you through all this. It just isn't fun to demo because it's a lot of just clicking on stuff and waiting for things to happen. So once I've provisioned that, I came in here and I inserted a new step, and it's the detect sentiment step. And then said, well, what text do you want me to do this on? And because I have the Twitter connector up here, I get what they call dynamic content down here. So when I click my cursor in here, I have everything that comes out of this here, and I pulled tweet text in there. So it scores that tweet and gives me something between 0 and 1, and I'll show you what that looks like here in a second. And then down here, you can add actions to it. So you can insert it to Azure SQL database, on-prem SQL Server. You can also shoot it to like a Power BI streaming data set and things like that. And a lot of other options. So you could store it to a file, whatever you want to do. So this would spin up if it's enabled. Every minute it'll go look for tweets about dogs and it'll store them. So what does the output of this look like? So if you follow this down, this inserts to an Azure SQL database here. I've pulled that down on-prem, and then let's see what one of these looks like. Bit of word of warning here. This was actually raw data that we pulled for a customer a couple years ago. If you follow MLS, you're going to know which club it was. This is raw data from a match in a year they weren't very good. So if you see language that offends you, I sincerely apologize, but it is raw data and they were not good that year. So let's see what one of these looks like. So I've kind of highlighted a good one and a bad one here. So here's one. This seems very nice, right? This was my first soccer pro game. I enjoyed it so much. Thanks, club. Go over here. So how did it score that? So our sentiment score comes out like this. So like I said, it's very long. It's not just 0 or 0.1 or 0.9. You get this long number that comes out of it. This, obviously, it scored it very positive. I mean, she said she had a great time. That one makes a lot of sense. So let's look at a bad one. And there's definitely more swear words in this one. So what we've got is one here. So I wanted to pull one here that's not, it's not somebody with like a string of curse words or something like that. It's kind of subtle disappointment, and it's interesting to see how it scores that. So this says it's frustrating to see so many calls missed against a player they had a couple of years ago because he doesn't go down every time he's kicked. So the guy is not happy, but it's not, like I said, it's not like a stream of profanity, or the tweet doesn't say like, I'm so angry right now. It says frustrating. So how does it score that? Come over here, it still understands that it's pretty negative. So it gives it a 0.001 because obviously he's mad. I have noticed over the years of working with this, so it's a little bit hard to see, and my zoom it unfortunately is broken right now, so I can't zoom this in farther. Those are two frowny face, and the sentiment analysis does seem to take some of the emojis into account when it scores things, which is kind of an interesting thing. Doesn't do it with GIFs. But it does seem to do it with emojis. So that is how sentiment analysis works. That's how you can use logic apps to connect to specifically cognitive services text analytics, but you can connect to a lot of the cognitive services APIs via that same way. You provision the resource in Azure, and then you add a step that is one of its actions. I didn't write a line of code to do that. Obviously, there's a few lines of code here to show these, but no other code otherwise. So let's flip back to the slide. And are there any questions from here? We've got just a handful of things left.
There's a question asking about the APIs, if there's an API that corresponds to comprehension.
So text analytics is probably the one that hews closest to that. And I think, as I know, AWS has, I don't want to say a set of competing libraries, but similar libraries. And I think text analytics, unless the name has changed recently, the text analytics counterpart in the AWS world, I believe, is called Comprehend. So just from that perspective, I would say text analytics, if I understand the question, is probably the right answer. Does that help?
That was a question from Joe, and I'm waiting for feedback from him. And while we're waiting, also just a reminder to everyone, feel free to take yourself off mute and ask a question verbally. If you recall in the opening slide, I had requested that this be a roundtable discussion as much as possible. So feel free to jump in, again, either verbally or through the chat window.
Yeah, definitely. That is strongly encouraged. Okay, well, while we wait to hear back from that, I know we've got just a handful of minutes left. So let's talk about the Translator API. So it can do more than this. I kind of picked my 4 highlights. So it can translate text, obviously. Now, I say using neural machine translation there. So the majority of the languages that it can translate to and from, it uses that. And I'm not smart enough to explain in depth what that means. But basically, NMT, so those models aren't exposed. You're not able to go see that. Microsoft did publish a white paper on how this works, but what it does is it's basically using a neural network, more or less, to make a more precise translation. And according to their documentation, it's also faster. You'll see when you go to the doc page, NMT is, I think, like 75% of the languages. The other 25% or so, and that changes, like I said, week to week, is using SMT, which is statistical machine translation. That is considered to be kind of more old school, less accurate, and slower as well. But you're still getting a pretty solid translation, but the ones that use NMT, according to their metrics and things like that, are better. But still, I think it's 61 or 62 languages when I checked a couple weeks ago. So a lot of options here. Another cool thing that it can do is it can transliterate text as well. So let's say you're trying to translate from Hindi to German, 2 different alphabets, and obviously some different phrasing and words and all those sorts of things. So it doesn't just do a crude translation and be like, well, this word is this. It actually, again, going back to those context clues and all the machine learning that underpins this stuff, will do transliteration as well. So it will make as accurate a translation as it can, even if it's languages that don't share an alphabet. It can detect language, which makes sense. And it can also look up word translations as well, instead of doing it real time. But the real time stuff's more fun to play with, I think. And that's why I'm going to show that here in a minute. We are strictly speaking text here, but like I mentioned earlier, all these APIs play well with each other. And as I bring this demo to a close here, you're going to see kind of how a call looks, what it looks like going out, what it looks like coming in. That's very similar to speech. And so if you're, like I said earlier, if you want to translate speech, and you're like, well, text is cool, but it's kind of boring, I want to hear it work, that this can work in coordination with the speech API. And here in the next few minutes, you're going to know basically how to call all of it. So without further ado, let's jump into the demo. So I'm not going to walk you through line by line, but I'm just going to give you kind of a brief tour of what this app is. And so what we've got here is I've got a string variable here called route, and it gives me the version of the API. So like I said, for a lot of the language stuff now, text analytics, translator, we're on version 3. So if you wanted to call version 2, you would put that in here where I've highlighted. And then I've got this, ampersand 2 equals, ampersand 2 equals. Those are language codes. So for this example, I translate one statement into 4 things, and I also translate it into the language that it comes from, and that's to show you that it can do language detection as well. Then, like I said, it's a simple console app. Graphic design and beauty is not where my gifts lie, so I made this pretty simple. So I just type the phrase you'd like to translate, I read that in, and then an asynchronous call goes out to the Translator API. And that's what you've got here. So we've got the route, which is defined up here. So that's basically the end of the URL. So it's the end of that call. The text to translate, which I'm pulling straight out of the console. And then I've got the subscription key and the endpoint as well. And so what those are is they're down here. So they're 2 environment variables. And I want to point this out mostly for like a security and cost management reason, is that I could just have these in plain text and it would work fine. And then I don't need to call them out here. I could just put them in there. But if this is, an app if the code is accessible to anybody else, they're going to know your subscription key, which is more or less your password into the API. They're going to know your specific endpoint. They're going to be able to call your stuff with that information and spend your money to do their stuff. So just from a security reason, it makes sense to put these in environment variables, and then we just refer to those here. So now you're not sitting there taking a screenshot of my stuff and say, we're going to spend all of Matt's money playing with this stuff. So this is kind of where we've built the call up here, and then the call actually happens down here. So we're building an HTTP post call, and you can see where we're adding content here. We're adding the endpoint and the route. So we're comprising kind of that whole call. We're adding content. We're saying, hey, there's JSON coming to you. We're sending the subscription key in that header as well. And then what happens when it comes back is you'll note this. So it deserializes the JSON basically chops it up and says, okay, I understand like there's 4 responses coming back, 1 per language. I'm going to deserialize that. I know it's JSON, so there's some kind of built-in calls to do that. And then I'm going to loop through these and just print them out so we can go over them. And it's going to show us the language it thinks it is. It's going to show us the confidence score for that pick. And then it's going to print out what it translates to. And that's pretty much it. So let's see it in action. Oh, it would help if I actually typed it right. There we go. All right, so it pulls up and we're gonna ask it, let's see, how will the Browns do this football season? And what does that look like in some other languages? We type that in, API call goes out, API call comes back. So it said, all right, this is English, my confidence score is basically 1.0, like I'm certain of that. So translated to English, it appears exactly like you think it will, it doesn't change anything. Translated to Italian, it sounds really cool. I don't speak Italian, but that sounds beautiful. Translated to German, I do speak a little of that. I'm not gonna inflict that on you now, but you'll note we do get the S set there, Fußball. So even though we're on the console, like transliteration, we can't really show here, but it does try to portray it correctly. And then if you noticed, and some people catch this and some people don't, like you kind of figured like EN is English, IT is Italian, DE is probably German. What's TLH? It is Klingon. Now, I am not enough of a Star Trek fan to know if the Klingon is correct here, but Klingon is actually one of the supported languages, and it's actually one of the NMT languages. So a fair amount of effort has been put into translating things to and from Klingon. So just to kind of show you that I haven't rigged this and it only works if it's English, let's ask it something basic in German, and then we'll return to the slides and kind of wrap this up. See, wo ist der man? And so it's like, aha, I know that's German. That's definitely nothing else. And so it, my German is not great, but I know I was asking it, where is the man? And translated to English, it is, where is the man? So I didn't rig this. It doesn't only work for English. We could throw a lot of languages at it. But before we leave the screen, what I want to show you is here's the actual JSON that comes back. And obviously with it being on the console, it's kind of ugly. But you can see here, like so part of the return set is what the detected language is, its confidence score as well. And then you get into the translation array there. And it's, the text is, where is the man? And it says what it is. You can see where the deserialization works through here. Like you've got from here to here, it's like, okay, this is result 1, pull that out. And then you've got from this bracket down to here, result 2, pull that out. That JSON structure, every API is going to be a little bit different in terms of what it returns and things like that. But in terms of building a call and understanding how they talk back and forth, what you've just seen here is going to help you if you want to bring a speech API into play here, or other parts of the language API, or get them all to play together on some project that you've thought of as I've been running my mouth. So hopefully that helps. So let's return to the slides and bring this to a close, because I know it's getting late. Okay, so I'm actually I'll show the bonus demo right at the end. It's pretty short. So let's skip this for now, move it back a couple of minutes and go to here. So what can companies do with this stuff? So Immersive Reader, we kind of went over, obviously could be helpful to enhance the accessibility experience of your website or something like that. Great use in education and things along those lines as well. And like I said, their tutorial is really excellent. I couldn't build a demo that shows all of it to you as well as they do. So if that was the part that kind of piqued your interest, definitely encourage you to go to the Cognitive Services site, click through to that, and check out some of the things that they can show you. Luis, we talked about briefly. Like I said, we just scraped the surface there. If that interested you, there's lots of great sessions and other content around that, and their documentation is also pretty strong on there too, walking you through some examples. So what it does is it allows us to build, like we saw, a conversational model. So for a company that's generally going to be customer interaction or something like that, I showed you how to build it without code. We were going through the portal. But if you want to build it with code, then like I said, they have strong docs that can kind of walk you through that. Q&A maker. We saw how we can build a chatbot, and though I'm realizing just now I forgot to show you how to do it. If you click through the channels on that test bot, it will give you the iframe code to drop in a website, to drop that bot in. So if you had a site, and my gift does not lie in web design either, but I do know what an iframe is, and I can cut and paste code. So it allows you to pretty easily drop that into a site. So you may be like, well, I'm a DBA, or I'm a dev, or I'm a support analyst. Q&A maker doesn't really help me. For support desks especially, or anything, if you get asked similar questions like, who does server X belong to, or where is this, or how do I do that? You can make a knowledge base and tell people basically, instead of talk to the hand, talk to the bot. And that you can offload that onto that thing. So if there's kind of a fixed list and you're always asked stuff, you can easily, like I said, that demo took me 5 minutes to build. You can build that and then tell people, go to the site and ask it the stuff that you usually ask me, and it's going to give you all that. So server names, environment names, personnel, if you're in HR, you can do that easily. If you can write a list of questions and answers in a document, you can use that. Text analytics, we went over it, particularly with sentiment. That's really important. If you have any online presence at all, I actually have a whole session I give, and it's got a lot of examples in there where even if you think your online presence isn't that significant, like there was a local pizza place that's about 10 minutes from my house that actually ran afoul of the Barstool Sports head guy, and their social media presence was significantly impacted, and they actually closed their business for a few days to handle it. This stuff can get out of control really fast these days. If you go viral for the wrong thing or with the wrong people, it can have a real impact. So automating sentiment analysis with logic apps or Azure functions or something like that can be a really effective tool. We talked about key phrase extraction and some of those where, if you have unhappy customers posting on a message board or Facebook or LinkedIn or whatever, you can pretty easily combine some of those tools and get a picture of what they're saying and figure out how to answer. We ended up with Translator. Does exactly what you think by the name, but for me, the corporate use for this is pretty interesting. So there's a company that my wife works for that they do public health stuff, and they recently went into a state where there's a lot of folks who speak Spanish, and they are localizing their customer support manuals and all that, no joke, by having 4 people at the company take Spanish classes for 6 months and then use those 6 months of Spanish skills to translate the documentation. I approached them and said, basically, I would do this for free because I want to be able to show this in this talk. They did not take my offer, but localizing software or documentation or whatever, the Translator API makes that super, super easy. Now, it's something you'd still probably want to run by a native speaker, but just the mechanics of doing it, it's really fast. I mean, you saw I'm just sending it a sentence there, but you could send it pages and pages of stuff and be probably 95% of the way there. So that's an example or two that I've seen there. So let's back up to this demo and then we'll call it a night after some questions. So this doesn't really fit under one of the libraries, but one thing that is part of the Cognitive Services kind of test bed is you can do automated content moderation. So if you're a company and let's say you're trying to keep bad language off your site, like a knowledge base or support forum or something like that, trying to keep bad language off, PII, other things like that. Let me pull this out of the way. There we go. How can you do that? How can you kind of automate that? Because you don't want to be paying people to edit posts and all those sorts of things. So this is kind of a test wrapper that they give us to show how that automated content moderation works. And so I'll walk you down just some basics. So this is a test message actually that they build, and they're trying to show that it can flag language, it can flag PII and things like that. And you see actually what the request is. So if you kind of wondered, we walked through in code, but we didn't see actually what the structure of that last call is like. This is very similar to what we just sent the Translator API. Obviously, this dots out the subscription key because, like I said, that's more or less password. But here's our call, here's our post, here's where it's headed, here's the content type, and this time, in this way, it's plain text instead of JSON. And then here's what it sends. And it's going to kind of show off some of the things we can flag here. So we send this, and I did kind of pre-bake this earlier. So we've got the original text. I turned autocorrect on, so it will add, it will adjust some things it thinks to make it better, but it will specifically call out, like, there's an IP address in here, there's an email. So you see there's this whole PII kind of set of things. There's a phone number, there's an address. It'll call all those sorts of things out. Then it classifies things. So category 1, 2, and 3 are basically this. Category 1 is language that's considered to be sexually explicit, adult, something like that. There wasn't anything like that in here. Category 2 is kind of less bad. It is something suggestive or mature language or content. So it picked up basically on the word crap there, and it's like, well, maybe that's mature language, but it's not, again, that score goes up to 1, so it's not super high. Category 3 is basically, is there offensive language in here? And this always makes me laugh because my wife hates the word crap. She'll use other words, and she's from New Jersey, so she's pretty adept at swearing, but that word bothers her. Well, that word bothers the automated content moderation as well. So it flags it there and says, listen, there's an offensive word in here. And obviously here, then it kind of calls it out and says, here's the word, it's English, the term is crap, and it sends all this back. So similar in the way we called the other APIs, you can call this and do some automated content moderation as well on your site to make sure that it kind of fits with the corporate identity that you want it to have. So with that, here's my resources slide. So Sam, let me know how I can update this. It does have the link to my Logic App Twitter's sentiment analysis blog, which, like I said, goes into gory detail of how I built that. So all the dry stuff I didn't demo, if you want to know how to build that start to finish, it's all there. Are there questions? And if not, here are all the ways to contact me. And I certainly encourage you to do that. Feedback, good or bad. My joke always is, if you think the session was terrible, email me. If you think it was great, tweet it. But either way, however you want to get feedback back to me, it's nice to have these opportunities to share the stuff that I think is cool. And thanks for spending an hour and change with me.
Appreciate it, man. Thank you. Looking at the chat window, currently there are no questions. And I do know that you had a hard stop at 10 to 8, which we're now 5 minutes over.
Oops,
so
yeah.
I have my closing remarks. If you'd like to go ahead and disconnect, feel free to do so. And I'll just wrap it up with the rest of the group. But before you leave, just want to thank you once again for joining us.
All right. Thank you very much for having me. It's always fun. Hopefully next time we can do this in person.
Looking forward to it. Take care, Matt. And as Matt is leaving, if you would please make me presenter, Matt, or turn the presentation over to me.
That should be okay. It says you can have it back. Is it lying?
Okay. Yeah, no, it's correct.
Okay, good. All right, bye.
All right, bye-bye. All right, everyone. So thank you all for joining us. As far as wrap up, what I always like to discuss are the upcoming events that are going to be happening. Again, due to Corona, everything worldwide is now virtual. So to your advantage, you can attend all these meetings from the comfort of your own office, home office that is. On September 1st is the Ohio North SQL Users Group, and they're going to be meeting online, and the topic is going to be SQL Azure Deployment Options by John Deerdorf from Indianapolis. On September 10th, which is, I forgot what September 10th is, but looking quickly at my calendar, I see that it is a Thursday. So there's a new group called the .NET Virtual User Group that's available on Meetup, and they meet several times during the month, and they have some very interesting topics. On that particular Thursday, they're going to be discussing Dapper with .NET microservices. On September 16th, Wednesday, is the Hudson Software Craftsmanship Group, and they're going to be meeting to discuss crafting better software. And Steve Smith will be heading that up, and that meeting will be happening online. And then on September 24th, which is the September meeting of this group, we're going to have Mads Torgersen from Microsoft, and he's going to be discussing C# 9 and the future of C#. So it should be a great meeting. As far as virtual conferences, there's a couple that are .NET related that are happening. Tomorrow, there's the .NET Dev Summit that's coming from Bengaluru, India, and you can access that through the link that's posted there. And the links will be posted on my blog, and I'll show you a link to that in just a second. And then on Saturday, August 29th, is SQL Saturday. And for those of you that are not familiar with SQL Saturday, it is basically an all-day event of SQL Server related topics. And every city has their own events, but due to COVID, everyone's locked down and now it's virtual. So you can essentially attend a variety of different SQL Saturdays worldwide without having to go anywhere. And so that provides you with free training regarding several topics related to SQL Server, whether it's business intelligence, database administration, query optimization, and a variety of other database related issues. So those are the meetings that will be happening. As far as my contact information and the blog. So if you have any questions that come up and you need me to forward them to Matt, you can feel free to email me at snasser@nistechnologies.com. You can also connect with me on Twitter and LinkedIn, and my blog, samnasser.blogspot.com. And there, the meeting information will be posted along with the URLs. Also, if you look in the comment section of today's meetup, you will see that there's a link to the YouTube channel and how you can connect to that and subscribe to it, so that way you get notifications once the video has been edited and uploaded there. So with that said, any questions before we wrap it up for tonight? And if not, thank you all for attending, and look forward to seeing you online next month. Good night, everyone.
Thanks, Sam.
You're very welcome. Thank you.